All right, everybody, welcome to the Jed Said Therapy channel, where we make your life as easy as we can using the fewest amount of words as possible. My name is Jed Thorpe, licensed therapist. Today, we're going to just get right into it and talk about this word, trauma. Ooh, it's scary, right? I know I'm supposed to be like, when I'm talking about something as sensitive and as delicate natured as trauma, I need to talk with a slower pace, maybe a little more soothing. I'll put some books in the background, use some big words, and everybody will be like, oh yeah, I feel much better talking about this now. Jed, continue, go on. I'm not gonna do that. We're just gonna get into it, talk about it, what it is, where it came from, how to resolve it, and it's not gonna take that long to explain. It'll take longer to actually do it. Stay tuned. All right, welcome back. Glad you're here. Before we continue, be sure to push the subscribe button. Every subscribe I get makes this message more heard. It gets more out there. More people can hear it. And this is really good information. You're going to hear things today that you have not heard before in regards to trauma. We'll just get right into it. But before we do, I've got to give my opulation, my offering to the call-out culture out there, because this isn't information that is very well known. So even though it's accurate and completely valid, people may not like it, might rub them the wrong way. Because sometimes, we'll get into that later. But anyway, that said, to all the call-out culture of that's not right, this is that, man, cut me some slack. This is going to be a short video, less than 10 minutes, talking about a very complex topic of trauma. So obviously, I'm not going to say everything. However, I might say something that you haven't heard before, or maybe haven't thought of in this type of way. Let's talk about trauma, where it came from. Prior to 1980, can you believe that? Just 1980, 40 years ago. Prior to 40 years ago, there was no record in Octothorpe hashtag science or research, psychology of emotional trauma, emotional damage. There was no such thing really that was documented. Prior to that, 1980, trauma was only physical. Traumatic brain injury, concussion. There was some physiological change happening in the body that was life-threatening. So it was a trauma that needed to be dealt with and healed. In 1980, it only came up because psychologists and psychiatrists were trying to figure out how to help Vietnam vets who were coming back from the war and exhibiting all these symptoms, mental symptoms, and they were very similar. They were having nightmares. They were being reactive, being hyper-aware, not able to sleep, depressed, and like, there's something to this. Let's call it post-traumatic stress disorder. And voila, emotional trauma was born. Isn't that cool? It's good to know some history around this stuff rather than just hearing people talk on and on about the different layers and the big T's and little t's and the acute t's and oh man, don't we just as humans try to explain everything almost to an unhealthy level? So, all right, call out culture. I'm sorry. Please don't flog me or anything like that. So hey, don't shadow ban me. Don't cancel me. I'm just laying it out. So that's trauma prior to 1980. And then after 1980, even in 1980, they didn't get it right because the psychiatrists at that point defined emotional trauma as a very, how do they say it? It's like a very extraordinary event, life-threatening, That's not actually trauma at this point. Now, with more understanding, we've studied it more, we've labeled it more, we've dug into it. Now we understand that emotional trauma, well, that's pretty common. That's pretty common. Happens to everyone. I submit that we all have a pretty big emotional trauma. Happened right when we were born. I can't imagine that as little babies we even had any idea how to handle this overwhelming emotion. We're crying, we're screaming, we're yelling. Things were happening. That had to be pretty overwhelming. First of all, we gotta, I guess second of all, third of all, Should I impress you with some big words? So you know, hey, this guy knows what he's talking about. He doesn't have books in the background, but I feel like he might know what he's talking about as long as he uses some big words like reptilian brain or limbic system or neocortex, which are the 3 parts of the brain. Reptilian brain, can you believe they called it reptilian brain? They couldn't think of anything better than reptilian brain. I don't know. All that aside, the reptilian brain, just to make it nice and quick, is the really old part of your brain. And then you have the limbic system, which is not as old, but also pretty old. And then you have the neocortex, which is where the more developed and abstract thinking, moves around. The problem is that in this brain of ours, with the 3 layers, the reptilian, the limbic, and the neocortex, man, this trauma piece happens in the memory part, and it's in the middle. And sometimes it's hard to get in there. It's hard to get in there to work through this stuff because, man, we like to stay above in the surface area. So working through trauma or figuring out how you're okay, experiencing, having the emotions, labeling them, giving them a voice if that's what you want to call it, doing inner child work, memory reprocessing. That stuff takes time because it has to go down into the brain a little bit, into those early formations of the brain. Man, we're pretty evolved as humans. You know, we've been around a whole a long time. I wonder if reptiles have trauma. Anyway, just food for thought. So that said, there you have it. That's what trauma is. It's the brain hasn't processed through this overwhelming event that created so much emotion. It left you feeling so unsafe and so unprepared. Brain hasn't processed through that. Brain has a hard time getting to that even. There's also, man, we could just spend so much time on this. We could do complex trauma. That's when a whole bunch of overwhelming emotional surprises happen, leaving you feeling very unsafe, where it happens all throughout your childhood, where your brain gets stuck in this limbic system, isn't able to recall the memory, really isn't even able to get down to it sometimes. But man, just people are reacting to it all over the place. Isn't that wild? It's good information. I know I should be speaking more softly and more soothingly, because maybe this is creating some trauma for you, just hearing it. That said, you want to work through the trauma, all you have to do is think, how am I actually safe right now? This is just words that Jed's saying. I'm okay, That'll help your brain to turn off those alarms. By the way, let's talk about triggers. That's pretty cool. Triggers. Oh, you hear it all the time. I got triggered, or he triggered me, or she triggered me, or that triggered me, or this triggered me. What's happening with triggers is fascinating. Again, there's some trauma that happened in the past, and you haven't really dug into it enough for it to heal and process, for your brain to process that you're actually okay. So what happens is triggers. You know what I mean? It's rather than trigger, because that's like a gun, I would call them trip lines, like trip lines, yeah. Because that's your brain just trying to keep you safe. When you hear, feel, see, experience something that is a reminder of a past memory, the brain lets off that alarm. That's the trigger. Isn't that wild? Trying to keep, all the brain's doing, trying to keep you safe. So that's a little extra knowledge, a little Jed Said Therapy knowledge right there, dropped in your lap, because you made it this far into the video. Not only did we do trauma, what it is, when it is, where it came from, we also talked about triggers, what those are, and then also with all this stuff, working through that trauma will alleviate those triggers that won't happen as much. Why? Because that reptilian or limbic system part of the brain where the memory is stored, well, it's not so reactive anymore. It doesn't feel, it's not stuck in that emotion and memory. It doesn't feel so distressed all the time. It doesn't feel like it has to keep you safe because it's realized that you're okay. Isn't that awesome? Man, therapy. I dig this stuff. So cool. And that's it. That's the Jed Said for today. Good information. You can also find, I'll do a blog on this. I've got a lot of blog articles up on all sorts of emotional intelligence topics. You should check it out. You'll find it on the website, www.meaningtolive.com. And until next time, awareness up.